Welcome back, everybody. I know it's been a while. My apologies. Life has taken over. I'm in a new setup. I moved in a new crib. Be back in college in a month, so more consistent uploads are on the way. I promise this time. But today we're going to jump right back into this. The player profile on Keenan Allen. He's a receiver I'm very high on coming into this year. Hopefully he ends up better than the last guy. I made a video on Michael Thomas, who's now dead and pretty much out for the year. So if you listen to any of my content, I am sorry in advance. Keenan Allen's probably going to die after this video comes out too. So let's jump right into where we are with Keenan Allen at this moment. He's currently the wide receiver 10, working off of Underdog's half PPR ADP data. Their best ball, if this is redraft, they're slightly different, but it's the closest thing I have to a consistent ADP. He's the 28.8th overall pick right now, so call it 29th, end of the third round for most leagues if you're working in a 10-man format. Last year, he was the wide receiver 21, 56th overall pick. Shout out Fantasy Pros, I love their ADP. It's the best, helps me get through all these previous years and shit super quick. And that's obviously due to the unsureness about the QB room, with Tyrod, who is kind of garbage, and Herbert, who a lot of people thought was kind of garbage coming out. He fell a lot, and there were always those injury concerns that you see with Keenan Allen, but he slotted in at the wide receiver 14 overall, wide receiver 11 in points per game. Like I said, this is all half PPR. Had 147 targets for 100 receptions, 992 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 14 games last year. He was 5th in the league in total target share, 9th in total red zone targets, and if you took him, you were pleasantly surprised with his overperformance, and he was a pretty reliable wide receiver too, especially when Herbert took over. Now that we're sitting here at wide receiver 10, though, we're looking at a guy who I think, much like Michael Thomas was supposed to be, let's pour one out, is a screaming value at the wide receiver position. Before we hop into prior production from years past, let's look at last year with and without Mr. Justin Herbert. So as I said last year, Keenan dropped a fat 100 for 992 and 8 touchdowns in 14 games, and he left 2 of those early with injuries. Fun fact, he was 5th in targets for wide receivers last year, 2nd in targets a game, and was 0.1 behind Devontae Adams and 0.1 ahead of Stephon Diggs. Elite company, and that's with 1 game with 2 targets and 1 game with 3 targets, both of which he left early with injury, dragging his numbers down. Obviously, Adams missed time too, but long story short, Keenan Allen is an elite company when it comes to a target percentage. So if we kind of dilute this sample down, we kind of got to do a little bit of number manipulation. I know some of y'all aren't the fondest of that, but we got to figure out what were the numbers when he played with only Justin Herbert, only full games with Justin Herbert. We get the stat line of 134 targets for 93 receptions for 909 yards and 7 touchdowns in 11 games. So that's pretty good, and it's honestly not that far off of what he had for the full year because he had like 1 week with Tyrod at the start of the year. On a weekly basis, we're looking at 12.2 targets for 8.5 receptions, 82.6 yards, and 0.6 touchdowns per week. Over a full season, I know extrapolation isn't the end-all be-all of this. It's just a fun way to see how a player would have done over a full season on their pace from the previous year. It gives us something to work off of for this year. That's 195 targets for 136 receptions, 1,322 yards, and 9.6 touchdowns. If we do that including the games he left early, we get 139 targets for 96 receptions, 955 yards, and 8 touchdowns in 13 games total, so that was the 11-game sample size. That's the 13-game sample size if you want to count the 2 he left early for injury, which leaves him with 171 targets for 118 receptions, 1,175 yards, and 9.8 touchdowns. Actually had a higher touchdown number. Look at Keenan Allen go. So we have these numbers. I'll put them up on screen, make it a little more easy to digest because I just spit a lot of numbers at y'all. We're going to see how that would translate to fantasy production. If we take the 13-game sample size and count his injured games, we get 235.3 total fantasy points, 14.7 points per game for the Sharps, which would place him at the wide receiver 5 overall and the wide receiver 7 in points per game. If we exclude the injury games, so we run in that 11-game sample size, we're looking at 257.8 fantasy points, 16.1 points per game, which would make him the wide receiver 4 both overall and on a point per game basis. Big consistency guy here. I love it. He's staying true. Top 5 pretty much either way if you're a point per game person. Top 7, but that's still pretty incredible. Like I said before, I know extrapolation isn't the best method, but it's what we have to work with. It's how you get a taste of what he would have done over a full season with certain conditions taken into account. So even if we take into account that Keenan Allen basically only played 12 games with Justin Herbert, he was on pace to be a top 7 wide receiver at absolute worst in those games. That's an incredible pace, and considering he's coming off the board as the wide receiver 10, we're already looking at some form of value in Keenan Allen's ADP. Now that we figure out what his production was in 2020, we're going to key back all the way to 2016. In 2019, he was the wide receiver 8 overall, 11 in points per game, wide receiver 12 overall, wide receiver 18 in points per game in 2018. In 2017, he was the wide receiver 3 overall, wide receiver 4 in points per game, and in 2016, he died. I believe he tore his ACL. That might have been the kidney laceration. All you need to know is that he really didn't fucking play at all. That's it. So he's had a pretty good ceiling so far. He's shown that he could be a top 3 fantasy wide receiver. And outside of that, he's had that pretty consistent low-end wide receiver 1 floor, mid-wide receiver 2 if you want to go on a point-per-game basis. So looking at that and looking at what he would have done last year with Justin Herbert and what he actually did, is this fair enough to be ranked just at the edge of being a top 10 receiver? I don't think so. He's never finished as less than a wide receiver 1, like I said, depending on league size. So you're drafting him at this point with his ADP of wide receiver 10 as a floor play. And he's surpassed that in 2 of the past 4 years, and in 2020, he was on pace to surpass that with Justin Herbert as his quarterback, even with the games taken into account for injury. I think that if you take Keenan Allen probably in that sweet spot of the end of the 3rd, middle of the 3rd, maybe even early 4th, depending on who your league mates are, you're getting a screaming value that's not just going to be a guy that beats out his ADP, but can help propel you to a championship with high-level production. Moving on from just Keenan Allen and talking about some of the outside factors that are going to help him produce at a high level like we've seen him do before, it has to start with the quarterback room, and that is Justin Herbert. Herbert burst onto the scene last year. He wasn't even supposed to start. Then somebody stabbed Tyrod Taylor in the lung, and here we are. It might have been Justin Herbert himself in a funny little mask. Herbert popped up, ripped ass, threw piss missiles, absolutely set the league on fire, winning Rookie of the Year. He did overperform in certain occasions. He was one of the better quarterbacks in the league against pressure. That isn't really a sticky stat year over year. He can step back. But that's because the pocket was so horrifically bad. I believe they had the 32nd graded offensive line as per PFF, so they were really not working with much. It was literally Justin Herbert out there doing it by himself. It was fucking 6 for 16 out there at those offensive linemen. But some of that wasn't even his fault. Like I said, it was the offensive line, and Anthony Lynn's offense is an absolute fucking joke. The dude cannot call plays. The dude cannot open up the field. He was having Herbert chuck little checkdowns, which are nice. I'm not going to lie, for my Eckler shares, I appreciated it when he was playing. But there just wasn't enough room to open up the offense with Anthony Lynn and Shane Steichen, who I hate that guy. It's always his fault. He called the plays. He's part of the reason this offense was so pedestrian at points last year, despite having such a star in Justin Herbert. They have a new play caller and coach with Joe Lombardi, who has experience with high-volume passing offenses, as well as a highly skilled number 1 receiver in Michael Thomas, and that translation bodes well for me and seeing how Keenan Allen is going to produce this year. Keenan has already said he feels more free in this offense. Hopefully he takes a step up from his paltry 6.7 yards per target, which would have been 94th in the league last year. There are 93 other receivers who had higher yard per target numbers than Keenan Allen, and Keenan Allen is probably the best route runner in football. Anthony Lynn is a horrific coach, and he murders offenses when he is coaching them. Hopefully Joe Lombardi frees this up. But it's not just going to be Joe Lombardi. They already have immense chemistry, Keenan Allen and Justin Herbert. This offense is going to be funneled through Justin Herbert, Austin Eckler, and Keenan Allen. There are some contenders for a number 3 target share after them, like Mike Williams, who perennially holds his back after every deep ball. Jared Cook, who's like 36 at this point, can kind of catch a pass, but not really. And Tyron Johnson, I think, he looks pretty good. That franchise guy says he's going to be all right, so maybe I'll keep an eye on him. Looking at that improved coaching, we also have a much improved offensive line. Like I said, they ranked 32nd in the league last year, dead last if you're forgetting how many teams there are. And they drastically improved it. They added the best center in the league last year, Corey Linsley, who for some fucking reason the Packers didn't even call. You have an all-pro center, and you're like, hey, I don't want you back on the team. They didn't even do that. They didn't even bother to give the guy a call and see if he would take a discount. They just said, we'll sign a running back after drafting one in the 2nd round last year. Seems like a pretty good strategy to me if you're a front office. They added another nice piece in Matt Filer and the consensus offensive tackle 2, possibly even offensive tackle 1 for some analysts, Rashawn Slater, who was hailed for his pro readiness and ability to slot in anywhere on the offensive line outside of center. Good thing you signed the best center in football. And that single biggest hole on this team was patched incredibly. Packers take notes. The 32nd ranked offensive line added an incredible tackle, a nice flex piece, and the best center in the entire league. That's incredible. It's going to make life so much easier for Herbert. He won't have to make so much happen under pressure, and it'll probably lead to the ability to open up this offense more because you can have those time for the routes to develop, for players to get open, and all that. Another thing that was incredible about this team, and that speaks to the overall volume and skill that managed to overcome Anthony Lynn at points, was the offensive pace and play total. They had the most offensive plays run in the NFL per game at 70.5. They were 5th in team pass plays per game at a wild 41.3. That's nuts. I know a few teams beat that, but Jesus Christ, 41 pass plays a game? That's nuts. They were 8th in both total yards and yards per game, 21st in points per game, which is a bit concerning, to be honest with you, especially as someone who's all in on Austin Eckler as well this year. But Allen can produce that mean to score a touchdown, and without the absolutely horrific play calling of Steichen and Anthony Lynn, this offense will open up, and I do believe they will see more scoring opportunities. I think at very worst, we have major improvements across the board, the offensive line being the first, the coaching situation being the second. And even if Herbert takes a step back in his play against pressure, I do not see why he can't take a step forward in more in structure, in rhythm types of plays with this improved offensive line and staff around him. Moving on to the big concern about Keenan Allen, I always like to address one or two, but the big one for Keenan Allen, by and away, is the injury concerns. I had in my notes that much like Michael Thomas, we're back with something more substantive. I could not have been more wrong. The Keenan Allen being injury-prone narrative, however, has persisted for like 4 years, dating back to 2016. And at that time, you might have been right, but at this point, I want to know what exactly we're doing. Over the past 4 years, Keenan Allen has played in 62 out of 64 games, although he has not started about 6 if I counted correctly due to injury. But he played. He wasn't great, but he played, so that's pretty decent if you ask me. That's 56 out of 64. That's, 2 games a year? You get other players who miss more than that. They aren't even called injury prone. I don't appreciate that. On Player Profiler, they also list severity of injuries, and he has not had a major injury since his ACL tear week 1 of 2016, and has only had one other minor issue with that knee since that, and it impacted him for a whopping 0 games. He wasn't on the injury report, and he played perfectly fine. He has had minor issues like this past year, but it's really nothing serious, and he's consistently given you 14, 15, 16 games a season. He actually had his single best year the year immediately after tearing his ACL and missing the entire year. Now, I'm not endorsing him tearing it again this year and then playing really well next year. I'm just letting you know that there really haven't been any major injuries to Keenan Allen that should be a cause for concern for you. So thinking about that, where are we now? What is the story of Keenan Allen? Where do I think he should be drafted? I do not think it's the wide receiver 10. I think his prior production, his elite ability last year, what he can do this year with an improved group around him at all assets, all parts of the game. I'm probably going to have him ranked top 5 when my wide receiver rankings come out, hopefully tomorrow or the next day. Hint, hint, wink, wink. I'm not going to give away who's in that, but maybe. You should probably be able to guess who's in it by now. I know I said I would have Michael Thomas top 3. I cannot have Michael Thomas top 3, or else my career is dead before it's even arrived, because he's probably missing the whole year because he hates the New Orleans Saints at this point. I'm all in on this offense. I have Eckler ranked top 5. I'm going to have Keenan Allen ranked top 5. I'm buying into the improvements made at offensive line, at coaching staff, and that Justin Herbert, even if he takes a slight step back in play facing pressure, he takes a massive step forward in stuff that's more in structure, more in rhythm, and all the things they actually want to draw up instead of Herbert having to create on the fly. Although that aspect of his game is highly beneficial to Keenan Allen as well. When you're taking a wide receiver 1, you're looking for both a decent floor and an incredibly high ceiling. And with his volume and role on what looks to be a great offense, a very high-powered, fast-moving offense, on what I think is a sneaky AFC Championship contending team, I'm very sure on both of those. I think that Keenan Allen is going to incredibly overproduce at his ADP of wide receiver 10 and easily slide in with a top 5 finish this year, if not greater, due to both his talent and the situation around him. That's going to be it for today, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the video. Long story short, go get yourself some Keenan Allen this year, and hopefully he doesn't die and need surgery like Michael Thomas did. Hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you did. Leave a comment telling me what I could do better. I should be back with more consistent uploads coming soon. I just had a lot going on in life. I feel like I always said I gotta put this first more. I think that it was really busy, really stressful, but now I should be back. The content should be back, and I'm here to help y'all win your fantasy championships this year. Peace out.